Women with deformed feet in China. Foot binding was the custom of applying tight binding to the feet of young girls to modify the shape and size of their feet. It was practiced in China until the 20th century, and bound feet were considered a status symbol, as well as a mark of beauty. Foot binding was a painful practice, and significantly limited the mobility of women, resulting in lifelong disabilities for most of its subjects. Feet altered by binding were called lotus feet. The ideal length for a bound foot was 3 inches, also known as the golden lotus, and small bound feet were considered beautiful. Estimated there were about 50% of all Chinese women may have had bound feet in the 19th century. At the time, to worship the small bound feet, men would pour drinks into the lotus shoe and drink from them. Bound feet were also a prerequisite for finding a husband. They also became an avenue for poorer women to marry into the riches in some areas. For example, it was customary to bind the feet of the eldest daughter of a lower-class family, who was intended to be brought up as a lady. Her younger sisters, without bound feet, can only become their elder sister's bond servants. Eldest daughter would be assumed to never have the need to work. Women, their families and their husbands took great pride in the golden lotus. This pride was reflected in the elegantly embroidered silk slippers and wrappings girls and women wore to cover their feet. Walking on bound feet requires bending the knees slightly and swaying to maintain proper movement and balance, a dainty walk that was also considered to be erotically attractive to some men. The process was started before the arch of the foot had a chance to develop fully, usually between the ages of 4 and 9. Binding usually started during the winter months since the feet were more likely to be numb, and therefore the pain would not be as extreme. First, each foot would be soaked in a warm mixture of herbs and animal blood. This was intended to soften the foot and aid the binding. Then, the toenails were cut back as far as possible to prevent ingrowth and subsequent infections, since the toes were to be pressed tightly into the sole of the foot. The toes on each foot were curled under, pressed with great force downwards with the help of cotton bandage, and squeezed into the sole of the foot until the toes broke, so the freshly broken toes can be pressed tightly into the sole of the foot. This binding and rebinding ritual was repeated as often as possible. This practice started out as a fashion and lasted until the late 20th century. In the 21st century, you can still find some elderly women in China still have bound feet.